So the anniversary of Mission Impossible, the first one, is about to be upon us or has already passed, and Tenet by Christopher Nolan is coming out, and we know not very much about it, but we do know it's going to be somewhere within the spy genre, although with Christopher Nolan it's probably going to be mixed with a lot of sci-fi elements and other things. So I would think it's interesting to go back and look at how other auteurs have sort of handled the spy genre. And again, I'm not here to attack or criticize Nolan really, but it's a fact. He steals a lot from older directors, usually Kubrick. So I think it'll be really interesting when it finally comes out. I know a lot of people are going to praise it for its originality, and I have a sneaking suspicion a lot of Mission Impossible it's going to be in there because Nolan is on record being a big James Bond film. But let's get to Mission Impossible proper. Released in 1996, DePalma was, again, an interesting studio choice. This is actually one of Tom Cruise's first really big films because primarily he was an actor. He did some producing before this, like Days of Thunder, but this is really one of his first really big things that he produced, and it shows. I mean, this thing is a huge thing all over the place. The cast is amazing with John Voight, Emilio Estevez, Ving, and some of the more minor people. Daniel Craig even makes a cameo, so the cast is spectacular. And what's interesting, they don't go the way you think. Also, people who are going to be there are not going to be there later. So it plays with your mind in terms of what you think you're going to get in terms of a, quote, spy adventure. But obviously, really the two stars here are Tom Cruise and DePalma. DePalma is, again, always at his best in terms of camera angles and misdirecting people and just the way he moves people and the way objects work in relation into time and space. He's always extremely methodical. And of course, there's a lot of fakeness in terms of in artificiality. But aside from a very little CGI or things like that, you could tell from most of the scenes, these are real explosions, these are real people, they're using real locations. So there's a groundedness to the Mission Impossible universe that, unfortunately for me, sort of just gets lost. It's become more of a fantasy adventure series, and I actually have no problem with the later entries, but it's such a sharp contrast. I mean, just watching the first one, they do carry over a few plot things, but it just seems to be operating in a whole different universe. But in this entry, you really get a sense of the paranoia, just the sheer pessimism and the sheer not knowing what to expect, not knowing if your friends are your friends or who's an ally or what's going to happen next is very pervasive in the first entry. Now, the weakness is pretty obvious, and I'm not going to belabor it, which is the plot really makes no sense. I mean, the logic is so thin how they move from scene to scene. It's really pointless to even follow along. You could actually look up an old Siskel and Ebert review. They are completely confused as to what the hell is happening, and they're like, we don't care. It's a really great film at just a visceral level in terms of feeling the action and tension in each scene, and you feel the POV of Ethan as a character in terms of his own confusion as to what is going on. But it does sort of fail at certain points because the audience is going to be confused. Unless you're really sharp and paying close attention, you're going to get really lost in the plot details. So the plot is a little all over the place. But what I do appreciate is that even though it's a big trade-off, you do get a really good mystery. It's something that's going to be really in your mind for a little bit because it takes a time to solve it. Although the Mission Impossible series does have a couple mysteries in the later entries, they're just solved so easily. They're not really real mysteries. They're kind of mysteries only in name only because it's like, okay, it's a mystery, but you solve it so quick in your head, you're like, I don't see why it takes them so long to figure this one out. But the first one features a real mystery, and you're really not clear as to what is going on or what Ethan is up to. You know the basic plot. Ethan is trying to get the knock list, but besides that, you are really going to be in the dark for some time throughout the whole film. And it is internally coherent. So it's not a problem that, the plot contradicts itself as much as, and I do really love DePalma's work, but you are going to pretty much say at certain points he is lying to the audience. It's a very thin line between misdirecting the audience and sort of outright lying, and I'm sure he goes back and forth on that a little bit in the film. But overall, a very spectacular piece, both within the spy genre and within DePalma's canon of film. And I would highly recommend the documentary on DePalma because he had some special details that I didn't know, that how much there was huge amount of production problems, which ironically are still plaguing the Mission Impossible series. So I don't want to paint it that Mission Impossible, the first one, was full of fairy tale with no production problems. They had a lot of production issues. One of the most intriguing one was that the studio was actually very hesitant about having a kind of more spectacular ending, which now almost all of them do have, and he sort of laid down the foundation. And even Tom was a little wavering whether they wanted to really have a really big ending, but De Palma was like, to Tom, was like, listen, you're the biggest movie star, you can tell them to do it. And he's like, okay, yeah, okay, I trust you. And they ended up doing it, and it's still, to this day, one of the best endings I've ever seen. Of course, you can sort of question the physics of it and all that, but just when you see it for the first time, you're like, wow, this is really amazing. And they just put in so much work and just such methodic detail into the final scenes. So this is much more of an appreciative essay, not as analytic as some of my other pieces, but I think it's really worth checking out, especially in relation to Tenet, which is going to be coming out soon.